common ground, never middleman, understand. This is Trippin' Jim, we do what we want, you do what you can. Can you comprehend? If I think, then therefore I am. This is not a test, y'all should've came with a plan. I'ma stand on this conversation, ain't no constant hating. You need to get to the point, and we bringing the navigation. If it's a fork in the road, we'll make a lane in the grass.
You are now tuned in to the Dead Center podcast.
What's up, everybody? This is Trip.
And I'm Jim.
This is Dead Center, where we try to conversate, not constipate. Get to the point. And today's point, the heartbeat bans in multiple states.
Yeah, get rid of the heartbeats. Heartbeat ban. Get
Well,
it out
I
of
mean,
here.
that's what abortion does.
Oh, goodness. No, but so the heartbeat abortion bans.
Right,
correct. The precedent is that if you can detect a heartbeat it's usually between 6 and 11 weeks, according to these bills, then you can no longer get an abortion.
Well, a heartbeat is detected at 18 days, but you don't generally find out you're pregnant as somebody who's, married and wife had 3 kids. You don't generally find out till about week 5 to 8. So the courts or the states that are proposing these bills are directly trying to essentially ban abortion in their state.
Right, no exceptions.
Right. They know what they're doing. They know the timeline that women generally find out they're pregnant. They know those things, and they are strategically making this bill in order to affect that directly. These bills have no exceptions in them either. So even though I'm pro-life, I'm still very against that. Traumatic experiences within pregnancies, I don't think that the government should be able to dictate that. That's kind of my stance on it. And when you have Republican states or Republican senators, even Donald Trump himself coming out and saying, I am against a bill that has no exceptions.
Right.
Then it's obvious that these bills are more just a loud statement rather than actually going to seriously accomplish anything.
A weird flex?
A weird flex. Yeah, weird flex, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
The closest it could get, because I don't think it's going to attack the constitutionality of abortion. I don't think there's enough weight behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But it will do it might, I should say, do some damage to Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which, if anybody's not familiar, it takes away the undue burden from the state on the mother, right? So, proving rape, providing things like that, it essentially made it a lot easier for women to get abortions.
We're not doing a discussion on abortion right now.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that.
Whether or not abortion is right or wrong, or where or when, what lines are drawn for what rights and whose rights. But there's a lot to be said in that discussion, and we will have it. It will be a longer discussion. It'll be one of our Dead Center discussions. So
look out for it.
Yeah, look out for that. Because we do disagree. I'm very pro-choice when it comes to this. And that being said, these laws have gone through the first step of entering the appellate court, which is being struck down as unconstitutional via precedent of the Supreme Court by federal judges.
Mm-hmm.
So the federal has already come down on the state and said, "Nah, man, you can't do that." That being said, if the state then enforces the law as written in their state, and a case comes up where someone says, hey, constitutional right, and Georgia or Alabama says, well, that's too bad because our law. At that point, you enter the appellate courts of the federal appellate courts, and you get possibly to the Supreme Court. If that does happen, and granted, we have 15 plus states that may or may not make this leap. That's a lot of chances to get up there. That's all I'm saying. But if they do, right now they're being stricken as unconstitutional under Roe v. Wade. The precedent that they are apparently going up against, as far as the Constitution right now is concerned, is Roe v. Wade. So if they go into a Supreme Court case, first of all, the case that they're going to be ruling on isn't the state of Alabama versus the precedent of Roe v. Wade.
Right.
It's not going to be the state of Ohio or the state of Kentucky versus the precedent of Casey versus Planned Parenthood. It will be a new interpretation of precedent and the Constitution as it stands by the current Supreme Court as it pertains to that case. So whatever that case may be, for example, no exceptions under rape or incest. If that is the case that makes it there, then it is both of those precedents that will be subverted or overstepped by a new precedent, which will be this ruling. And if it has to do with, in this example, if it has to do with exceptions not being included, then the precedent of Roe v. Wade and the precedent of Casey versus Planned Parenthood actually bows to this new precedent of there needs to be exceptions or whatever. If the case is just, a woman wanting to get an abortion and being prosecuted for murder when all it was her doing her constitutional right under Roe v. Wade for an abortion, then the ruling is directly under Roe v. Wade. If it's, I was raped and whether or not there's exceptions by, this law you caused undue burden, now we're talking about directly affecting Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Right.
So,
and in that situation, I think that Planned Parenthood versus Casey would stand up to this law.
Right. There would be, again, this ruling would set new precedent almost no matter what.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. That's if
there is a Supreme Court ruling.
Right.
It has to get there.
It has to get there. There has to be a challenger. And that's the big thing.
They've taken a lot of shots to get there is all I'm saying by there. Well, I mean, the current GOP in all of these red states.
Well, yeah, it's really just these red state governments because you've had multiple Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, Lindsey Graham, multiple hard red people have been no exceptions, none at all. And that's a big deal. Traumatic experiences within a woman's life, and then that pregnancy following. You're talking about depression, anxiety, suicide, things like that. No, we don't want to put an undue burden on the mother. No, we don't want to exacerbate a traumatic issue, and for that reason, there should be the choice when it comes to a traumatic experience. So when you're talking about,
you keep making these statements that are part of that abortion discussion. And
I understand.
If you keep doing it, eventually I have to be I don't agree with that.
But I am agreeing with. I'm saying I'm saying in that, and I'm trying to stay within those bounds because I don't want to get into
the laws don't stay within those bounds.
Fair enough. I'm not disagreeing with that.
You're pointing to one flaw, in your opinion, one flaw in this law, and going, look, that one, because we can sit here and all go, yeah, that's wrong. But that's not the only thing that could.
I'm saying why it's going to be struck down, and I think that's the biggest reason why it's going to be struck down, because there's no exceptions. There's no.
So you think that the highest possibility is these laws make it to the Supreme Court? If they make it to the Supreme Court, the highest possibility that it makes it there will be a case that has to deal with the lack of exceptions, and therefore, more than likely, with all of these talking heads in the Fed saying we're going to. This is something we disagree with.
I don't think
that means that even the conservative justices are going to say that there needs to be exceptions.
Right.
If that's what is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's kind of obvious that either there's some kind of backdoor shady stuff going on because some federal people are saying to the state people, hey, when you pass these laws, do this one thing. Mm-hmm. And if we get a case under that, we get to set new precedent for that, which starts to build structure around abortion laws. Mm-hmm. So then they can build off of that precedent and say, yes, you have the right to an abortion, but now it has to be within these exceptions. And that's shady, like I said. More than likely what's happening is these governments that have been established in these states, the regimes that have turned more and more red, are going to end up challenging directly Roe v. Wade and possibly affecting something like Planned Parenthood versus Casey. That's what I believe is much more likely because it seems to be what they're aiming to get at. So,
right.
If you're aiming
high and taking what you can get. essentially.
Right, but either way, you set new precedent if it gets to the Supreme Court, and with that, you build structure around what is currently a very, I mean,
Well, so
like you
kinda
were
like
saying
it's a
earlier
dry
in
run.
pre-production, it's kind of a blanket of Roe v. Wade. Women have the constitutional right. Under Casey, we have no undue burden, so you have the other laws that are popping up, which we haven't mentioned yet.
Well, the undue burden is also, that takes away husbands, say in it, in, a wife getting an abortion, stuff like that. It would seem that husband and wife would be what was represented back when this Planned Parenthood versus Casey was happening, right? You had there were more instances of married couples in that point in time, and there was the argument for the justification of the husband having a right to say it, or having a say in his wife's doings or whatever, and that was struck down with Planned Parenthood versus Casey as well.
Okay, I look. All I'm saying, in my humble opinion, there are lines to be drawn, but they're closer to the lines that the opposite of these bills that are popping up in other states, like what was that, New York?
Oh, very opposite. New York and Virginia. Are you talking about the late term abortion?
Right.
So that's a little bit. That's way on the other spectrum, or on the other side of the spectrum. When you have,
but I mean, we're having the discussion. We're having the discussion, right?
Right. Absolutely. So those bills were, one of the authors of the bill was testifying to Congress, and it's, when is the restriction?
Which state is this?
New York.
Okay.
When is the restriction on your abortion bill? And she said, as far as I know, there is none.
Right. It's the point of exiting the birth canal.
Right. Point of exit. She's in labor, about to give birth. Is an abortion still possible? Yes. And the only way I see that as acceptable is if the mother's going to die. You're going to hemorrhage and bleed
again,
out.
our personal opinions we're trying to keep those out of this.
I'm doing my best.
We're trying to stay in the middle.
Right.
In my from the middle, I'm going to say that is also to a level it's abhorrent.
Women don't just abort their kids at 36 weeks. That doesn't happen. You don't.
Right. So the whole reasoning behind the bill is you need to have structure for these extreme cases that are late term.
Right.
I agree with that. But I do believe there probably needs to be more structure there. There needs to be a little bit more of a protection for the life on its way out.
Right.
Because at that point, it's complete. Now, we can get into the whole nitty-gritty of when, but my point is they're not having structure there. Just kind of blanket saying there's no restrictions, have it whenever until the baby is out of view completely. That is really scary.
Well, it's just crazy to me that these are our options now. That's what's being played as. It's either you can abort it whenever, however you feel like it, or you can't have one at all, period, no circumstances. It's like, is this really the best you got? Honestly?
Either one, though, and this is where I was getting, either one of those extreme cases can produce a judicial case that makes its way through the appellate courts to the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
You could end up, potentially, through these laws in New York and Virginia, having the unborn life represented. You could have that happen. It could happen on either side of the spectrum as well.
Right.
Depending on the particular case that makes it, via either of these laws, you have a Supreme Court ruling that sets new precedent. That could put, now granted it's federal judicial precedent, so it's not enforceable. It's just kind of, that's our new federal ruling, so it is law. Please enforce it, or please stop what you're doing, or whatever. Because, I mean, it can get there, but usually if the Supreme Court decides it, it decides it. Whatever they decide, based off of whatever side of the spectrum these laws get to, that could be a huge step towards resolving the abortion issue. Now, granted, with political tensions the way they are and justices being sat so recently, you probably don't have that happy medium outcome that they are supposed to provide.
Well, I mean, I don't really think Kavanaugh given his history and the things that he said about Roe v. Wade before, as he was, being questioned questioned in front of the Senate, I don't think he's going to overturn Roe, especially not with a bill like this.
I'm not going to go so far as to say what I think is going to happen via each individual justice. However, like I said, political tensions being where they are, the idea of political revenge through legislation, kind of, vendettas and stuff. Brett Kavanaugh has a chip on his shoulder, if anyone does.
Right.
But the real thing that I'm getting at is the judicial system has an opportunity to do its job so well that it actually shows why it's there, which is whenever stuff gets so hot between these political tensions and the Fed and the state go head to head, they resolve it in a way that cools everyone off. That is supposed to be the result. Everyone cool down because the Constitution actually says this. A majority of the 9 of us think that, and we're here to do that ruling. That's our job. In that case, I would love to see something from either side get to a point where that happens, if that's how it happens. But like I said, as our current political environment sits, I think that if either side of those get to the Supreme Court, we could have a jerk towards the right. I guess I jerked the wrong way.
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. If the right is going to play, because right now the left has an advantage on this. Abortion is widely accepted in the United States. It's culturally accepted. It's Oprah did a whole week on shout your abortion. Like, it's a thing. So when the right comes in with these very old school, laws that they're producing right now, it's frowned upon heavily in the eyes of the American people, and I think the Supreme Court would reflect that. And while I see what you're saying about being jerked one way, I don't necessarily think that that's the way that it will end up. Just because like you said,
you're remaining optimistic from a middle seat,
right? Well, I just don't see, just because some state legislature wants to stand up on their soapbox and scream and shout, I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to respond to that in a way that these states will like. Revenge legislation, legislation in times of crisis, things like that, they never work out good. They're always wind up being emotionally, they're based in emotion, and they tend to be bad.
And you think that the Supreme Court is above that,
correct,
as it sits right now?
Correct.
I hope you're right. I really do. I hope that at the very least, if a case does make it, because honestly, I think that they should just continue to strike it down. Mm-hmm. But, as the cases get there, we'll know more along the lines of what they're going to have to rule on if it makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. In my opinion, I hope it continues to just get stricken down as they rise up from both sides of the extreme. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't happen, I hope we see at least a case that can give us some structure behind what is and what is not protected under the Constitution.
Well, this is you always talking about pairing legislation, and I think this would be a great opportunity for that. If states wanted to do the right thing, and this is just okay. So let me. The states wanted to produce some legislation that might have some foothold within some of the Supreme Court justices' minds. You don't come out with the most radical thing you can think of, right? And you also put some structure as far as no exceptions on an abortion, or.
But again, it's the idea of aiming for Mars and you hit the moon. I mean, if you
I'm
go
okay.
after Roe v. Wade, you force this. If you get to the Supreme Court going after Roe v. Wade, if Roe v. Wade is continuously what is used to strike down federally that ruling, mm-hmm. all the way through the appeals courts, if you make it to the Supreme Court, then what you end up with is something along the lines of a ruling that has to be built upon or going against Roe v. Wade. That is the play.
I guess I should have clarified and said a bill that I would like to see.
Right. I mean, that's, again, we're still being optimistic from the middle that someone somewhere in power is going to go, how about we just compromise?
Right.
In my belief, the current political system, as it sits with the extremities holding power, you do not see that in legislation.
Well, even if
You in the legislative branches, you do not see it happen when it comes to all of this. You're going to have to go through the judicial system. That's why it's there.
even if the radical elements weren't so in your face right now, I still think that the polarization it's the nature of the beast right now in our political climate. That one side punches one way and the other side's trying to punch back even harder. This is and let's just be clear. These bills are a direct result of the New York and Virginia bills. Like, if they didn't produce these bills that were essentially saying women could get abortions at any time, even though that's not generally what happens, it's essentially just a strike back, because Republicans have played it like it is, these sinister, evil new Democrats.
Both sides, the idea that the other side doesn't like the most is the lack of exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, or the lack of enforcement. Because if you're talking about the Virginia and New York bills, it's how do we know that these women aren't just getting abortions whenever they want?
Oh, I
and
feel
using
yeah,
exactly.
I'm suicidal. Kill my kid.
I understand the logic from the right at that point. I understand where they're coming from, I guess.
Right.
That could be the case. So the idea that there's no structure there
so
is the most important, because every example you use is going to be something that assumes. It's the same thing when you apply hypothetical to the lack of exceptions in the heartbeat bills. Same kind of thing. The lack of exception and that may be what we get out of the Supreme Court ruling. Who knows?
Well, we'll see
If
where
we
this
get
goes.
there.
If we get a challenger, well, it'll be huge, and it'll be in
The news way before it gets to the Supreme
it'll
Court.
be on the news for y'all. We'll be able to talk about it with you, and I'm very interested to see where this goes, because I'm not some one-issue voter, but abortion's a big deal, and it has been.
Which is why we're going to have a longer discussion on the actual topic itself.
Absolutely. There's a lot to nuance. There's a lot to get into. There's a lot of it's just a lot to it, man. It's evolved over the years as well. So I don't have anything else on this. We'll see where it goes from here. And with that being said, y'all make sure to check out www.thedeadcenterpodcast.com. Links to all of our content, links to anything on the shop you want to buy. We've got everything for you that you could want. Patreon, SoundCloud, anything like that you can check out on the website. Share, like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got more content coming for you. Jim mentioned the Dead Center discussions multiple times. Is there anything else you got?
www.thedeadcenterpodcast.com. All one word.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's everything.
All right, man. With that being said, I'm Trip.
And I'm Jim.
This is Dead Center, where we try to conversate, not constant hate, and
Get to the point.
I love y'all. See y'all next time.
Peace.
Common ground, never middleman, understand. This is Trippin' Jim, we do what we want, you do what you can. Can you comprehend? If I think, then therefore I am. This is not a test, y'all should've came with a plan. I'ma stand on this conversation, ain't no constant hating. You need to get to the point, and we bringing the navigation. If it's a fork in the road, we'll make a lane in the grass.
You are now tuned in to the Dead Center Podcast.